The emergency call came in at 11:47 p.m. On the other end of the line, a woman's trembling voice whispered words that would change her life forever. "My husband is missing," she said. But investigators would soon discover he wasn't missing. He was already dead. This is the chilling story of Rebecca Monroe, a suburban wife from Denver, Colorado, whose picture-perfect life unraveled in the most horrifying way imaginable. To the outside world, Rebecca was a devoted mother of 3, and her husband, David Monroe, a decorated U.S. Army veteran, was the rock of the family. They lived in a 2-story home on the edge of the Rockies, surrounded by neighbors who described them as the couple everyone admired. But behind those manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations, their marriage was collapsing into darkness, and in the fall of 2024, that darkness would consume them both. Welcome to Criminal Codex, where we uncover the true crime stories that leave investigators stunned and communities shattered. Stay with me, because this case twists in ways you won't see coming. On paper, the Monroes had it all. David, 50 years old, had served 20 years in the Army, including deployments overseas. His fellow soldiers called him a man you'd trust with your life. Rebecca, 41, was seen as a stay-at-home mom, the kind who never missed a PTA meeting. Together, they were raising 3 children, ages 12, 9, and 6, in a neighborhood where crime was nearly unheard of. But friends close to the family had noticed cracks forming, arguments over money, tense silences at social gatherings, a few whispered confessions from Rebecca about feeling trapped. By the summer of 2024, divorce was more than a possibility. It was inevitable. Court records later showed Rebecca had consulted an attorney, but instead of moving forward legally, she chose a darker path. In August 2024, Rebecca filed a temporary protective order against David, claiming she feared for her safety. She presented text messages and shaky video clips as evidence, but the court wasn't convinced. A judge reviewed her claims and dismissed the order, writing that the couple's interactions reflected a toxic but mutual hostility, not abuse. In hindsight, that ruling feels chilling, because by September, Rebecca had already decided if the courts wouldn't free her from David, she would free herself another way. Beneath the suburban facade, Rebecca was leading a double life. She had begun an affair with Ethan Cross, a younger man she met through a fitness club. To Ethan, Rebecca was exciting, mysterious, and available in ways his own relationships weren't. But what he didn't realize was that he was stepping into a deadly web. Just 2 days before David's murder, Rebecca showed Ethan something disturbing, a Glock 19 handgun she kept at home. She laughed it off, saying it was just for protection. But prosecutors later argued it was her way of signaling what was coming. On September 21, 2024, David confronted Rebecca. He had discovered the affair and demanded answers. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices through the Monroes' open windows that night, but no one could have imagined how it would end. In the early hours of September 22, 2024, as David slept in the couple's bedroom, Rebecca stood over him with his own 9mm pistol. In her later confession, she admitted she fired a single shot to his head. David never even opened his eyes. What followed was as cold as it was calculated. Rebecca dragged David's body into a storage container, bleached the bedroom walls, ordered a new mattress, and loaded the container into the family USV. Somewhere north of Denver, she buried him in a shallow grave that to this day investigators have never found. But Rebecca's biggest mistake wasn't pulling the trigger, it was opening her mouth. The day after the murder, Rebecca drove to Ethan's apartment. Her hands were bruised, her demeanor oddly calm. She told him everything: how she shot David, how she cleaned the house, and how she buried him. When Ethan stared at her in shock, she dismissed his fear with chilling detachment. He wasn't David anymore. He was just gone. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He began recording his calls with Rebecca, and the words he captured would later become key evidence in her trial. One recording still makes seasoned detectives shiver. "If you think I could hurt a fly, then you don't know me at all. I told you, I'm like the Queen of Hearts. Off with their heads." At that moment, Ethan realized the woman he thought he loved was capable of far more than betrayal. She was capable of murder. From the outside, the Hamilton family's life looked like a slice of the American dream. A proud military veteran husband, a seemingly loving wife, 3 healthy children, and a home that stood as a symbol of success. But behind closed doors, this picture-perfect life was collapsing. For months, neighbors noticed strange patterns. Some nights, Daniel's truck wasn't parked in the driveway at all. At first, people assumed he was away on military duty, but those closest to him knew the truth. Daniel had been spending many nights at his unit's barracks instead of at home. Why? Because home no longer felt safe. Court filings would later reveal that Melissa had become increasingly volatile, her mood swinging from affection to rage without warning. She accused Daniel of controlling her, of ruining her freedom. But messages uncovered by investigators told a very different story, one where Melissa herself was manipulative, aggressive, and cruel. In July 2024, Melissa even tried to obtain a protective order against Daniel. She told the court that she feared for her life. But when a commissioner reviewed the evidence, including home security footage and text messages, her claims began to unravel. The recordings didn't show a terrified wife cowering in fear. Instead, they revealed a woman taunting and berating her husband, trying to provoke him into reacting violently. The commissioner dismissed her petition, noting that the marriage was deeply toxic and headed for divorce. For Daniel, this ruling should have been a moment of relief. Finally, the truth was on his side. But what no one realized was that Melissa had already chosen her path forward. Divorce wasn't enough. She wanted Daniel gone, forever. In the weeks leading up to September, Melissa grew distant from her family. Her friends noticed she was glued to her phone more than usual, often stepping outside during gatherings to take whispered calls. It turned out she wasn't just drifting away from her husband. She was falling deeper into an affair with another man. This wasn't a fling. According to prosecutors, Melissa was obsessed. She texted her lover late into the night, sending messages that hinted at a future together, a future where Daniel no longer existed. Then came the first sign that things were about to spiral out of control. On the evening of September 19th, Melissa invited her lover over to her house while her children were away with her parents. At one point, she pulled out a gun from a lockbox, a Glock pistol that Daniel had purchased years earlier. She showed it off casually, almost playfully, but her words carried an edge. She told him, "Sometimes you have to take care of problems yourself." Her lover laughed it off at the time, not realizing those words would soon become a chilling prophecy. The following day, Melissa made a series of calculated moves. She arranged for her children to spend the night with their grandparents. She stocked up on cleaning supplies, and she waited. What happened next would change everything. September 20th, 2024 began like any other Saturday in Brookhaven. The weather was calm, the streets quiet, and nothing about the day suggested the darkness that was about to descend on the Hamilton household. By evening, Melissa and Daniel were both home. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices echoing through the walls. The argument, according to investigators, centered on one thing: Daniel had discovered the affair. For years, Daniel had tolerated Melissa's unpredictable moods. He had weathered the storms, kept the family together, and sacrificed his own comfort for the sake of his children. But now, the truth was out in the open. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had endured before. Melissa didn't deny it. In fact, according to her later confession, she threw her affair in his face during their final argument. She told him she deserved to be happy, that she was done living under his shadow. Witnesses would later testify that Daniel's voice was raised in anger that night, but Melissa's tone was ice-cold, almost rehearsed. That fight would be the last moment Daniel was ever seen alive. In the early hours of September 21st, while the neighborhood slept, Melissa carried out a plan she had been shaping for weeks. Daniel was lying in bed, exhausted from the confrontation, when Melissa quietly retrieved the Glock pistol from their bedroom drawer. She stood there for a moment, staring at the man who had once been her partner, her protector, the father of her children. And then, without hesitation, she raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening inside the quiet house. Daniel never had a chance to react. Melissa moved quickly, as if she had rehearsed every step. She dragged Daniel's body off the bed, leaving streaks of blood across the floor, and forced him into a large storage container she had prepared earlier. The container was heavy, but Melissa had planned ahead. Using blankets and straps, she managed to slide it down the stairs and into the garage. There, she loaded it into the family's minivan. Before leaving, she grabbed Daniel's phone and smashed it into pieces. Then, she drove his truck several blocks away, abandoning it to create the illusion that he had left home on his own. But Melissa wasn't finished. In the pre-dawn darkness, she drove north toward a secluded stretch of forest outside the city. Somewhere along those desolate back roads, she dug a shallow grave and buried the man she had once promised to love forever. By the time she returned home, the sun was rising. She immediately began cleaning. Bleach on the walls, carpet scrubbers in the bedroom, a mattress order placed online just hours after the murder. To Melissa, it wasn't grief or shock, it was damage control. For 2 days she lived as though nothing had happened. She dropped the kids off at school, smiled at neighbors, and even texted Daniel's friends, pretending he had gone away for a few days. But Melissa's mask began to crack sooner than she expected. On September 22nd, she visited her lover, and in a moment that would ultimately destroy her, she confessed everything. She described how she had killed Daniel, how she had buried him, how she had scrubbed the house clean. Her lover noticed bruises on her arms and asked where they had come from. Melissa's answer was chilling. From dragging him, from cleaning, taking care of things. The casual way she said it sent shivers down his spine. At first, he didn't know what to do. Should he believe her? Should he run? But deep down, he realized the truth. Melissa was deadly serious. What he did next would determine the course of the entire investigation. Melissa's lover, a man named Ethan Ward, couldn't sleep that night. Her words kept echoing in his head, from dragging him, from cleaning, taking care of things. He replayed every detail of their conversation. She wasn't joking. She wasn't exaggerating. Melissa had killed her husband, and she had admitted it with the kind of cold detachment that made his blood run cold. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He would start recording her. On September 23rd, he initiated another phone call with Melissa. His voice was cautious, careful, but inside his heart was pounding. He told her he was disturbed by what she had revealed. Her response was more chilling than the confession itself. "Wow," Melissa scoffed, "if you think I could even hurt a fly. Daniel wasn't even a person anymore. He was nothing." The tone of her voice, the absence of any remorse, it was the kind of statement that prosecutors dream of catching on tape. Ethan knew then that he couldn't keep this secret. But before he could take action, Melissa dug herself even deeper. Later that same evening, in another conversation Ethan secretly recorded, Melissa compared herself to the Queen of Hearts, saying, "Off with their heads. If we could just round up the scum of this earth and kill them all, the country would be better." To Ethan, this was no longer just about a confession. It was about a woman who believed murder was justified, even casual. Meanwhile, Daniel's absence was starting to raise suspicions. When he failed to report to duty at the security firm where he worked part-time, his colleagues began making calls. Daniel had never been unreliable, never missed shifts without notice. The alarm bells were ringing. On September 28th, exactly 1 week after the murder, Melissa finally called the police. Her story? Daniel told her he needed time away and wouldn't be back for at least a week. She acted casual, almost irritated, as if his absence was an inconvenience rather than a crisis. But by then, the threads of her cover-up were already starting to unravel. Police immediately found holes in her story. Daniel's truck had been found blocks away from the house. His phone was missing, and neighbors reported that just days earlier they had seen a brand new mattress being delivered to the Hamilton residence. Why would someone replace a mattress so suddenly after her husband disappeared? Police grew suspicious, but what they didn't yet know was that Ethan Ward was about to walk into their station with the missing piece of the puzzle. On October 2nd, he showed up with screenshots of texts, transcripts of conversations, and, most damning of all, audio recordings where Melissa openly confessed to killing Daniel. The words on those tapes would send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned investigators. Melissa Hamilton wasn't just a grieving wife. She was a killer who thought she had executed the perfect crime. But the cracks in her plan were beginning to spread wide open. On the morning of October 3rd, detectives from Cottonwood Heights arrived at the Hamilton residence with a search warrant in hand. Melissa greeted them with feigned confusion, her face painted with the expression of a woman who couldn't understand why police were interested in her home. She even offered them coffee, as if it were just a routine neighborhood check. But inside, investigators quickly discovered signs that her carefully crafted story didn't hold up. The master bedroom told the first tale. Though the mattress looked brand new, crime scene specialists peeled it back and found a faint reddish-brown stain seeping into the bed frame below. It had been scrubbed, bleached, even sanded, but blood has a way of telling the truth. Using luminol, investigators sprayed the room. Under the blue glow of UV light, the walls, blinds, and floor lit up with splatters invisible to the naked eye. The room wasn't clean at all. It was a silent witness. In the corner, technicians also found packaging from a newly purchased mattress. A quick check of delivery records confirmed Melissa had ordered it just days after Daniel's disappearance. Downstairs, in the laundry room, investigators uncovered bottles of bleach, heavy-duty carpet cleaner, and sponges, all recently used. The faint smell of chemicals still hung in the air. And then came the discovery that left no doubt. A Glock pistol box, partially hidden in a storage bin, wrapped in a child's old T-shirt. It was the exact model of the weapon Melissa had once flaunted to her lover. The physical evidence was stacking up, but investigators weren't finished yet. When detectives pulled Melissa's phone records, the timeline became impossible for her to explain. GPS data placed her near the neighborhood where Daniel's truck had been abandoned. Even more damning, her phone had pinged along a stretch of back roads leading north out of town, the very path she had described in her chilling confession to Ethan Ward. Faced with this mountain of evidence, detectives moved in. On October 4th, they arrested Melissa Hamilton on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. But the case didn't end there. During the investigation, police began looking closely at Melissa's parents, Harold and Linda Collins. Both had been spotted at Melissa's home multiple times in the days after Daniel vanished. Initially, they claimed they were simply helping their daughter care for the children. But surveillance records and store receipts told a darker story. Linda had purchased the new mattress, while Harold's phone had mysteriously been reset, wiping all location data from the critical days after the murder. When questioned, Harold slipped up. In what investigators would later describe as a Freudian confession, he muttered, "I didn't go into the bedroom where it happened." It was the first time he had ever acknowledged there even was a where it happened. Now the case had widened. It wasn't just Melissa under suspicion. It looked like her parents may have helped her cover up a brutal killing. And yet, one haunting truth remained. Daniel's body was still missing. Without it, the prosecution's case would face hurdles, and Melissa knew it. But she didn't realize just how determined investigators and Daniel's fellow soldiers were to bring him home. By early October, Melissa Hamilton was sitting in a jail cell, facing charges that could put her away for life. But prosecutors knew they were still missing one critical piece of the puzzle: Daniel's body. Without it, Melissa's defense could argue that there was no definitive proof of murder. Perhaps Daniel had simply disappeared on his own. Perhaps Melissa's confessions were the ramblings of a distressed wife. The prosecution needed more. That's when Daniel's brothers-in-arms stepped in. Daniel had served for years in the Army National Guard, building friendships that were stronger than family. His fellow soldiers refused to sit back while his killer tried to erase him. They organized search parties, combing through fields, rivers, and remote roads stretching across northern Utah. "We're going to find him," one soldier told reporters. "We don't leave our own behind." Law enforcement joined forces with the volunteers. Drones scanned open land, cadaver dogs sniffed along riverbanks, and search teams hiked through miles of rugged terrain. The evidence from Melissa's phone gave them a starting point. Her GPS data showed she had traveled north on the morning after Daniel's disappearance. But it wasn't precise enough to narrow down a burial site. Weeks passed, still no body. Then came the break. During a sweep of a rural creek bed in Davis County, investigators found something lodged against a cluster of rocks, a heavy plastic storage container. Inside, traces of blood matched Daniel's DNA. It wasn't his body, but it was proof. Melissa had transported him using that very container. The discovery gave prosecutors the physical evidence they needed. It also confirmed what Melissa had confessed. Daniel had been hidden somewhere in the vast wilderness north of Cottonwood Heights. But the case was about to get even more tangled. Investigators uncovered text messages between Melissa and her parents in the days after the murder. Linda had written things like, "Don't worry, it's handled," and "We can't let them find anything." Meanwhile, Harold's bank card showed purchases of cleaning supplies, gas, and tarp, all on the same day Melissa was seen scrubbing down her home. The implication was clear. Melissa hadn't acted alone after the killing. She'd had help covering it up. By late October, police arrested Harold and Linda Collins on multiple counts of obstruction of justice. The news rocked the community. People who had once seen the Collins family as pillars of suburban respectability now saw them as accomplices to murder. Still, Daniel's body remained missing, and Melissa's trial date was creeping closer. For the Hamilton children, 3 young lives caught in the middle, the nightmare was only just beginning. Their father was gone. Their mother was behind bars. Their grandparents were now accused of helping hide the crime. What had once been a picture-perfect family was shattered beyond recognition. And as prosecutors began to build their case for trial, they unearthed one final twist. Melissa had been eyeing Daniel's $500,000 life insurance policy all along. To them, the motive was now undeniable. But the chilling question lingered. If Melissa was capable of murdering her husband in cold blood, what else was she hiding? Melissa's arrest shook Utah to its core, but what happened after she was booked into jail was just as disturbing as the crime itself. At first, she seemed calm, too calm. Officers described her as unusually composed, almost as if she thought she could outsmart the system. But soon, her behavior began to unravel. In the jail's visitation logs, Melissa made multiple phone calls to friends and extended family. Some of the calls were routine, checking on her kids, asking for money on her commissary account, but others raised eyebrows. In one chilling conversation, Melissa told a cousin, "They can't prove anything if they don't find him. That's the only thing that matters." That single sentence sent shivers down the spine of investigators. It was proof that Melissa was still thinking like a criminal, not a grieving wife. Meanwhile, prosecutors prepared for the upcoming pre-trial hearings. They wanted to prove that Melissa was not just guilty of killing Daniel, but that she had done it with premeditation. And the evidence, piece by piece, supported their case. The financial motive, Daniel's $500,000 life insurance policy, which Melissa had inquired about just 2 weeks before his death. The GPS data. Melissa's phone pinged along a desolate rural route in Davis County, Utah at 3 a.m., the same path where the blood-stained storage container was later found. The confession. Though Melissa had tried to downplay her statements to police, recordings of her interviews showed clear admissions that she had drugged and shot Daniel. Parental involvement. Text messages and receipts tying Linda and Harold Collins to the cover-up. Still, one thing gnawed at prosecutors: Melissa's inconsistent stories. At one point, she claimed Daniel had threatened her and she acted in self-defense. At another, she said she barely remembered the night at all, blaming it on a cocktail of stress and alcohol. In yet another version, she pointed fingers at a mysterious intruder. The contradictions made her look less like a victim and more like a manipulator grasping at straws. But Melissa wasn't done scheming. While in jail, she tried to strike up friendships with other inmates, women facing drug charges, theft, and even assault. She offered them commissary items in exchange for small favors, but prosecutors would later reveal that Melissa also asked some of them to spread stories about Daniel being abusive, hoping it would create sympathy for her case. One inmate later testified, "She told me if I ever talked to the press, I should say Daniel hit her. She wanted me to make it sound like she had no choice." This manipulation painted Melissa in an even darker light. By December, the case had become a media spectacle. True crime bloggers and local news stations dubbed her the suburban Black Widow. Every court appearance was covered in detail, with reporters dissecting her every facial expression. And Melissa seemed to enjoy the attention. During one hearing, she walked into the courtroom with her hair neatly styled and a faint smile on her face. She even whispered jokes to her attorney, as if she were attending a casual meeting rather than a murder trial. For Daniel's family, this was unbearable. His sister broke down in court, crying out, "How can you smile when you killed my brother?" The judge had to call for order, but the outburst left a mark. Everyone in the room could feel the raw pain Melissa had caused. Yet despite all this, Melissa's defense team had a strategy. They planned to argue that she had been trapped in a toxic marriage, one where Daniel allegedly controlled her and threatened to leave with the children. Without Daniel's body, they claimed the prosecution couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had killed him intentionally. It was a risky defense, but Melissa clung to it like a lifeline. Still, one problem remained: her parents. Linda and Harold Collins had cut a plea deal to avoid lengthy prison sentences. In exchange, they agreed to testify against their own daughter. Their testimony would change everything. The day Linda and Harold Collins took the stand, the courtroom was silent. Everyone knew this was going to be the turning point. A mother and father testifying against their only daughter. It was almost unthinkable. Linda, pale and trembling, was the first to speak. Her voice cracked as she admitted what many had already suspected. "We helped Melissa. We shouldn't have, but we did. She told us Daniel was gone, and she begged us to protect her. She said if anyone found out, she'd lose her children." The prosecution leaned in, asking Linda to be specific. "What do you mean by gone?" Linda hesitated. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "He was dead. She told us she shot him, and we believed her." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The jury scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Then Harold took the stand. Unlike his wife, Harold was blunt, his voice steady but heavy with shame. "I drove the truck. Melissa loaded that container with him inside. I didn't see it directly, but I knew. God help me, I knew." He explained how he had driven the container into the woods, following Melissa's instructions, and abandoned it there. The defense scrambled to cross-examine, suggesting Harold's memory was clouded, that he was just trying to save himself by blaming his daughter. But Harold didn't budge. "I raised her. I know when she's lying. And I can tell you now, she killed that man." The jury sat stunned. It was the kind of testimony that couldn't be undone. For Daniel's family, it was vindication, though bittersweet. His mother sobbed quietly in the back row, clutching a photo of her son. But Melissa, however, sat stone-faced. No tears, no shock, just a cold glare toward her parents, as if she couldn't believe they had betrayed her. But the betrayals weren't over. Prosecutors unveiled yet another piece of evidence: Melissa's search history from her laptop. Among the everyday browsing and emails, investigators found chilling phrases. How to get rid of a body without being caught. Can police track a missing husband if no body is found? Life insurance payout if spouse disappears. The jurors shifted uncomfortably as these searches were read aloud. They weren't just random curiosities. They painted a clear picture of intent. Melissa's defense team tried to argue that the searches were taken out of context, that Melissa was simply curious because she watched crime shows. But the timing, days before Daniel's disappearance, was impossible to ignore. And then came the bombshell. Prosecutors revealed that Melissa had once confided in a coworker at her part-time job. According to testimony, Melissa had jokingly said, "If Daniel ever left me, I'd rather see him dead than with another woman." At the time, the coworker had brushed it off as dark humor, but now it sounded more like a confession hiding in plain sight. By the time closing arguments arrived, the case against Melissa was overwhelming. The prosecution painted her as a woman driven by greed and desperation, someone who saw her husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle. They reminded the jury that Melissa not only killed Daniel, but had dragged her own parents into a web of crime and lies. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded with the jury to consider the lack of a body. They claimed Melissa was unstable, pressured, and perhaps even manipulated by her parents. They begged for mercy, suggesting that at most she was guilty of manslaughter, not premeditated murder. But the jury wasn't convinced. After deliberating for less than 8 hours, they returned with their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Melissa didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply leaned back in her chair, lips pressed tightly together, as if the words meant nothing. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her parents, Linda and Harold, were given reduced sentences for their cooperation, 10 years each for obstruction of justice. It was over, or so it seemed. The courtroom verdict didn't just end a trial. It marked the beginning of a story that Utah and eventually the entire nation would never forget. News stations plastered Melissa Carter's photo across their screens with bold captions, "Black Widow of Utah." Documentaries, podcasts, and true crime blogs dissected every detail of the case. People debated endlessly, was she a cold-blooded killer or a desperate woman trapped in circumstances of her own making? For Daniel's family, though, there was no debate. In the weeks after the sentencing, his sister spoke publicly. Daniel was more than a victim in a headline. He was a brother, a son, and a friend. No verdict can bring him back, but at least now we have justice. Still, the absence of Daniel's body haunted them. They held a memorial service with an empty casket, filling it with letters, photographs, and small tokens of his life. His mother said quietly at the service, "We may never lay him to rest, but he will always rest in our hearts." Melissa, meanwhile, began her new life behind bars. Prison staff reported that she maintained the same eerie calmness she had shown in court. She kept to herself, reading crime novels and writing in a journal. Some inmates feared her, whispering that she was capable of anything. Others dismissed her as pathetic, a woman who traded her freedom for greed. Occasionally, Melissa gave interviews to reporters, still insisting she had been framed, still refusing to admit guilt. Her words only fueled the media circus, but over time, the spotlight dimmed. New crimes took over the headlines, and Melissa faded into the shadows of prison life. Her parents served their time quietly. Linda, frail and guilt-ridden, often broke down when interviewed. "I wish I'd told the truth sooner. Maybe Daniel would still be alive if I hadn't tried to protect her." Harold was less emotional, but his regret was just as clear. He told a journalist, "Helping her was the worst mistake of my life. I chose loyalty over morality, and it destroyed us all." Years later, criminologists would look back at the case as a chilling example of how family loyalty, financial desperation, and calculated deceit can collide with deadly consequences. But for those who lived it, it was more personal. Daniel Carter's name lived on, not just as the victim of a sensational crime, but as a reminder of how quickly trust can be betrayed. And even today, whenever Melissa's name resurfaces in the news, people remember the haunting words she once uttered from her jail cell. "They can't prove anything if they don't find him." It was the kind of arrogance that sealed her fate, a reminder that in the end, the truth has always a way of clawing its way to the surface. And that is why the story of Daniel Carter's murder and the unraveling of Melissa Carter's lies will forever remain one of the most unforgettable cases in true crime history.